My brother Daniel called with his usual condescending tone, warning me to keep quiet at dinner that evening. His girlfriend Christine worked at Silverman Capital, managing billions in private equity deals, and her colleagues would be joining them at the Modern. He made it clear he needed me to blend in without embarrassing him with talk of my consulting work. Nobody wanted to hear about freelance accounting, he insisted. When Christine's team closed billion-dollar leveraged buyouts with Fortune 500 companies, I sat in my financial district cafe watching my latte cool, agreeing to his demands. Daniel had been dictating my narrative for 35 years, never once asking what I actually did. He'd frozen my story at age 25 when I was scraping by in Brooklyn, and that version had never updated in his mind despite my attempts to correct it. He reminded me to wear a proper suit, not my usual discount store purchases. Christine was a director of private equity, he emphasized, and her managing partner might even attend. Appearances mattered in her world, he said, before abruptly ending the call. I glanced at my laptop where 3 term sheets sat unopened, each proposing over $1 billion for strategic acquisitions. JP Morgan had been calling all month about accelerating our timeline. Next week's board meetings would approve our Asian expansion, pushing our assets under management past $80 billion. But to Daniel, I remained the family disappointment who couldn't make it in the real world. I arrived at the Modern precisely at 7:50 p.m. The restaurant overlooked MoMA's sculpture garden, a perfect intersection of Wall Street power and cultural prestige. I'd hosted pension fund managers here dozens of times, closing deals over expensive wine. Tonight, however, I was Daniel's embarrassing younger brother who needed supervision. Daniel's face executed its familiar routine when he spotted me. Quick outfit assessment, subtle disapproval, resigned acceptance. My custom Tom Ford suit apparently wasn't good enough. He mentioned Christine was finishing a client call about a major merger, making sure I understood the importance. We settled at a table for 8, and Daniel's anxiety showed through his constant fidgeting with napkins and phone. He'd always been obsessed with social positioning, climbing whatever invisible hierarchy existed in his mind. When he asked about my consulting work, suggesting it was still just me and maybe an assistant in some Brooklyn walk-up, I simply confirmed I was working steadily. He leaned forward conspiratorially, insisting it wasn't too late for a real job, that Christine had mentioned Silverman was hiring for entry-level operations roles. Mom and Dad were worried about me, he said, though they wouldn't admit it. Christine arrived with 3 colleagues, all polished Wall Street archetypes radiating practiced confidence. Daniel introduced me with visible pride, explaining that his brother was between opportunities, but that Silverman Capital was always hiring for back-office positions. The group offered polite acknowledgement before Christine launched into stories about their latest $2.3 billion healthcare buyout, how they'd crushed KKR and Apollo on terms. Her managing partner was a visionary, she declared, positioning the firm for the next decade of private equity dominance. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around IRR targets, deployment pipelines, and market consolidation. One colleague laughed about boutique funds trying to compete with real institutional capital, dismissing them as cute but lacking the infrastructure for serious deals. Daniel glanced at me nervously, clearly imagining me as one of those doomed small-timers. I smiled and asked informed questions about their carry structure and co-investment terms, playing the unobtrusive role he needed. When Christine's phone buzzed during dessert, she announced that her managing partner had moved Monday's investment committee to 8:30 a.m., requiring all directors to attend. She told Daniel she'd need Sunday to prepare, and he immediately agreed to whatever she needed. As we parted ways, he thanked me for not making things awkward and reminded me that Christine's network was crucial for her career trajectory. He insisted I should want her kind of stability instead of my consultant lottery ticket fantasies. The valet brought my Audi A8, which Daniel ignored as always. I drove through Manhattan streets I knew intimately, past towers where I'd closed billion-dollar deals, past the cramped Brooklyn loft where everything had begun 9 years earlier. That's how long it had been since I'd left BlackRock to co-found Silverman Capital. the same firm where Christine worked. The same firm Daniel assumed was too prestigious for his disappointing brother to comprehend. We'd started with 3 Wharton classmates and $15 million from a family office, surviving on minimal salaries and determination. Then came funds of $200 million, $800 million, $2.4 billion, $6 billion. We'd grown from 3 founders to 350 professionals across New York, London, and Singapore. From struggling startup to a $52 billion powerhouse serving the world's largest institutions. My family had never known because they'd never asked. Every attempt to explain was interrupted with subject changes or unsolicited career advice. My father vaguely knew I did something with investments. My mother told friends I was still finding my path. Daniel had cemented me as the failure, and no evidence could shift that perception. So I'd stop trying, learn to nod along, and let them maintain their comfortable fiction. Monday morning would shatter that illusion completely. I spent Sunday preparing for the investment committee meeting. Critical decisions awaited. Asia expansion timing, final terms for our $9 billion Fund 7, and whether to acquire 2 struggling PE competitors or simply poach their talent. I reviewed financial models and confirmed attendance for all committee members and senior directors, including Christine Bradley, who joined as Director of Private Equity 5 months earlier. Her hiring had been our CIO Marcus's initiative, impressive credentials from KKR, strong execution record. I'd sat in her final interview, asked a few technical questions, and approved the hire. She'd been too focused on impressing Marcus to register me as anything significant. She'd never asked my name or title, and Daniel had never connected Christine's new prestigious job to his brother's consulting work. Monday arrived with steady rain. I dressed in my standard Brioni suit and took my private car to our Midtown headquarters, a 32-story glass tower with Silverman Capital displayed prominently. My assistant Patricia confirmed full attendance, mentioning that Christine had asked about additional preparation materials, but was told to just review her portfolio updates. My corner office overlooked Central Park, walls displaying Wharton degrees, industry awards, and an institutional investor cover from 3 years prior. At 8:20, I entered the boardroom where committee members were settling in, founding partners, our CFO and CIO, general counsel, and external advisors. The new directors sat together looking anxious, their first major committee meeting. Christine chatted with our head of investor relations, projecting confidence in her navy Armani suit. I took my seat at the head of the table as Patricia dimmed the lights for the presentation. The moment I began speaking, I watched Christine's face across the polished wood. Recognition hit like a physical blow. Her eyes widened dramatically, color drained from her face, and her hands gripped the armrests. Marcus leaned over and whispered to her, undoubtedly explaining that I was Alex Silverman, the managing partner and founder. She looked genuinely ill. I continued professionally through the agenda while Christine sat frozen in silence. Our CFO presented exceptional performance numbers, all strategies beating benchmarks, $4.2 billion deployed year to date. We debated the Asia expansion timeline, discussed Fund 7 structure at $9 billion, and addressed the acquisition question. When I asked what the ethical approach was regarding the struggling competitors, Marcus suggested acquiring them cleanly to preserve their teams and honor commitments, even at higher cost. I agreed immediately, instructing our team to draft generous terms because the founders had built something valuable. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Christine's team presented solid healthcare portfolio updates, but she contributed nothing, sitting rigid and staring at me throughout. When the session ended, she approached slowly, her previous confidence completely evaporated. She managed to say she hadn't realized I was the managing partner, her voice barely steady. I kept my tone neutral, complimenting her work on the healthcare deals that were tracking ahead of schedule. She mentioned meeting my brother Daniel, explaining that he'd said I was consulting and figuring things out. I smiled slightly and told her Daniel maintained his preferred narrative, which I didn't bother correcting. She looked like she wanted to say more, but Marcus called her away for portfolio discussions. She glanced back once, shoulders slumped in defeat, before walking away. Back in my office, I found 23 missed calls from Daniel and 17 increasingly frantic text messages. He demanded to know how I could be Silverman's founder, called the situation embarrassing, and accused me of letting him brag about Christine's important job at my own firm. The final texts deteriorated into anger about how everyone from dinner would think he was delusional. I felt only distant sadness. No triumph, no bitterness, just quiet grief for relationships built on willful blindness. Patricia informed me that JP Morgan's acquisition team had arrived, so I silenced my phone completely. Work came first. The day blurred through acquisition negotiations with aggressive bankers who wanted to capitalize on our track record. By afternoon, Patricia reported 26 calls from Daniel and multiple calls from my mother to the main line, insisting family mattered more than business meetings. When Patricia had explained I was in meetings about a major acquisition, my mother had gone silent and hung up. That evening in my Tribeca apartment, I finally checked my phone. 68 missed calls, 51 texts, 9 voicemails. Daniel's messages ranged from shock to rage to betrayal. My parents expressed confusion about why I'd hidden my success. Christine left a careful apology for any dinner indiscretions, hoping it wouldn't affect her employment. Daniel's late-night text revealed the core issue. Christine's boss suddenly wanted to meet him because he was my brother, treating him as important only because of me. Everything was backwards, he wrote. He was supposed to be the successful one. I didn't return any calls. Instead, I reviewed materials for Tuesday's partnership meeting, reminding myself that personal drama had no place in our boardroom. Tuesday proceeded smoothly, despite Christine's rigid avoidance of eye contact. Marcus pulled me aside afterward to say she was panicking about being fired. I scheduled a meeting with her for 3 p.m. to clarify that her strong performance meant her job was secure and that her relationship with Daniel was irrelevant to professional evaluation. She'd been worried her dinner comments and the family connection would doom her employment. During our meeting, she explained Daniel's fury that she hadn't warned him I was her boss. He'd accused her of choosing me over him and demanded she resign. She stated firmly that she wouldn't. This was her best career opportunity after leaving KKR. She also admitted she was seeing concerning patterns in Daniel. His obsession with status, his need to be superior to others, his greater upset about embarrassment than about fundamentally misunderstanding his brother's life. I offered advice as both her managing partner and Daniel's brother. Professionally, I told her not to make career decisions based on personal relationships. The role was valuable, and she should stay. Personally, I explained that Daniel was terrified of being ordinary, spending his life trying to prove he was exceptional. He'd needed me to fail so he could feel superior, constructing a narrative where he was the protagonist. After Christine left, I finally called my mother. The conversation was painful but necessary. She demanded explanations for why they'd learned from Daniel that I ran a major firm. I was the managing partner and founder of a $52 billion enterprise, I explained, not hiding anything but having stopped trying to force them to see reality after years of being talked over and dismissed. She accused me of cruelty when I pointed out they'd praised Daniel's modest consulting salary while I was raising billions, bragged about his promotions while I was turning down partnership offers from Blackstone. She began crying, saying I was claiming they'd failed me as parents. I confirmed that yes, they hadn't wanted to see who I really was, because it was easier having one successful child and one struggling child. A simpler, more comfortable story. Wednesday's Financial Times profile generated 75,000 shares by noon. Among 143 missed calls, 22 were from Daniel. His final voicemail carried a different tone. Smaller, broken. He'd read the article and seen the office photos, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd missed. Christine had broken up with him, telling him he only saw status symbols, not people. that he'd treated me as a negative status symbol. He didn't know what to do with that realization, admitting he'd never asked about my life because he'd never wanted to know. His whispered apology at the end carried genuine remorse. I saved the voicemail but didn't call back immediately. Thursday's quarterly all-hands meeting for 347 employees focused on announcing Fund 7 at $9 billion. I told them what mattered wasn't the size or returns, but that we'd built something real that created value for investors and opportunities for portfolio companies, and we'd done it together. The applause was overwhelming. Christine approached afterward, mentioning she'd started therapy to examine her own patterns, expressing gratitude for the role and the clarity it had given her. Friday afternoon, I finally called Daniel. Over the phone, his voice carried tears as he described his week of reflection about what kind of brother and person he'd been. Christine had been right, he admitted. He categorized people by status and hierarchy, needing me to be the struggling one so he could look good by comparison. When that proved completely false, his entire identity had collapsed. He'd spent the week angry at me for embarrassing him before realizing he'd embarrassed himself through chronic indifference. He'd consumed every article about my career, thinking repeatedly that this was his brother and he didn't know me at all. His question was tentative. Could he get to know the real me? I asked if he could handle it if the real me didn't fit his hierarchy, if I didn't make him look good by comparison. He said that was fair, admitting he was a mess. Christine gone, parents in crisis, his entire self-concept shattered. But he wanted to try. He was proud of me, he said, and should have said that first. Building something extraordinary while everyone dismissed me required strength he couldn't fathom. I agreed to lunch the following Tuesday with one condition. If we were building a real relationship, it had to be authentic. No performances, no status games, just two brothers actually trying to know each other. He promised to try. After hanging up, I sat in my darkening office and cried for the years of invisibility, for the brother I'd never really had, for the possibility that maybe we could finally start again. Fund 7 closed at $9.2 billion. Asia expansion launched successfully. We acquired both struggling firms, integrating their teams smoothly. The firm grew past 400 employees, but what mattered most were the Tuesday lunches with Daniel. At a quiet West Village cafe, we had actual conversations about his real McKinsey work and my real firm responsibilities, about his breakup lessons and our parents' failures, about the possibility of something different. When we parted, he hugged me genuinely for the first time, not the performative embrace from before. The slow work of building real relationships instead of performed ones became my proudest achievement. Christine thrived at the firm and eventually dated someone from our operations team who saw her clearly. My parents began asking real questions and listening to actual answers. I kept building, kept leading, kept choosing substance over story. Because ultimately, that's all anyone can do. Build something real, see people clearly, let yourself be seen. The rest is just noise.